Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to Lucier class. Happy learning English. Let's get to our lesson for today. It's called Food for the Future, but we will also discuss food from the past. If you remember from our last lesson, today we will discuss the extinction of food crops. There is much concern between scientists in the world that a lot of different food crops are dying out. This is a problem for the future generations because sometime in the future they will not be able to grow the crops that we grow today. That's why there are people and organizations who are trying to put a stop to this. We will try to talk to some of these people in today's lesson to figure out why is this such a big problem and how do we solve it. For a quick warm-up, let's answer the following questions. What vegetables do you see in the picture right next to me? We saw them in our last lesson too, and we went over some of them. Down here, I can see a bunch of peppers. Peppers of different colors. Yellow, orange, and red peppers. And all I know about peppers is that they're spicy. If you like spicy food that makes your tongue hot, then peppers are the choice for you. I also see some squash over here. I see the butternut squash. I see a pumpkin. I see a zucchini. All of these up here. And I can also see an eggplant. Does anyone like one of those? I don't think so. I am 23 and I still haven't learned to eat eggplants. I don't know about you guys. Where was this picture probably taken? What do you see around it? We see a lot of green vegetation right behind the picture. Vegetation is lots of green plants growing around. This must be some kind of a garden or a farm, a place where we can grow plants like the ones we see in the picture. So why are fruits and vegetables the big thing? Why are our parents always telling us to eat fruits and vegetables? There are a lot of different ways, but mainly we can put it like this. Fruits and vegetables bring good things into our bodies. They bring fibers and they're also low on fat. They're low on the bad things we might eat in food. Fruits have some degree of sugar, but it is natural sugar and not artificial. It is not added in the fruits, but instead the fruits have it by nature. Before we get into this story, let's talk a little bit about the purpose of paragraphs. Why do we have paragraphs in a story? A paragraph, or a piece of text, may serve a couple of different purposes. It may introduce a story. Once upon a time, there was a lady and seven dwarfs. That is the beginning of a sentence and the beginning of a story. Paragraphs can also serve to provide examples to an idea. Different examples or different mini stories to support the main idea. They can also conclude a statement or finish a story. Paragraphs have their different purposes, and it's your job to figure out why each of the paragraphs in this story was written. What was their purpose? We're not talking about the main idea, but the reason why this paragraph is in the story. So how many kinds of crops do you know? What can we consider crops? Crops are plants grown. Crops are plants grown on a large scale, usually grown for food. Plants grown on a large scale means when you grow crops, you grow a lot of them. Acres and acres of corn are grown in the United States. Wherever you look, all you can see is corn. Cornfields like this are very common because it's easy to process a lot of corn at the same time with the new machines that we have. Crops can also be vegetables. Vegetables like potatoes are grown on a very large scale, and then we consider them crops. What other crops do you know about? What other vegetables are grown on such a large scale? Is rice a crop? Does it fill out the necessary conditions? It is a plant, it is grown on a large scale, and it is usually grown for food. So rice is considered to be a crop. What other crops do you know? Do you know about wheat? You can say them or share them out loud with the rest of your classmates. Now let's do a little exercise on the meaning of the following words. Depend, species, grow, and preserve. The reason we're doing this is because we're going to use these sentences and these words in the story. That's why we need to learn them before we get there. I will give you guys a minute to read this tiny text from your books and try to guess the definitions of the words. After that, I will show you guys the actual meanings. I will do this in 3, 2, 1. I hope you did this by yourselves. To depend on is to put your trust in something. A species is a type of something, usually a type of plant or an animal. So species can be used for plants as well as animals. To grow means to get bigger and bigger, and to preserve something means to keep it safe for future use. You might guess why we're using these words in the story. Without further ado, let's get to the first paragraph. We will not read them together, but instead it's your job to read this paragraph by yourselves. If you haven't read it already, pause the video and do so we can continue with the discussion. Your first task for this paragraph is to find its purpose. So what is the purpose? Is it to provide some historical background or to summarize the key ideas? If I start talking and you still haven't found the answer, just pause the video until you do. The purpose of this paragraph is to provide some historical background on the subject. Why do we need historical background? Historical backgrounds to texts like this one are usually considered their introduction, or the introducing paragraph, the one that tells us a little bit about the background of this problem. We use the words like crop, which we've learned already, the word solely, which can also mean only. Solely is very similar to only. Only and not involving any with anything or anyone else. Can you say the word solely? Good work. And of course, we already talked about larger or smaller scales of doing things. A scale is a set of numbers, but it is also how big something is. What is the scale of this project? It is a project of a large scale. This means there are a lot of people involved, there is a lot of money involved, and the project lasts for a long time. This kind of project would be considered a project of a large scale. And to wrap this paragraph up, tell me, what did the people in Ireland depend on for food? What was the crop they depended on? They depended almost solely on the potato for food. And when a dangerous disease has struck the potatoes in Ireland, there was a great famine. A famine is a kind of disaster when lots of people have no access to food. Lots of people get very hungry, and some of them even die of hunger. Famines are very dangerous. Let's move on to the next paragraph. After you've read this paragraph, it is your job to find its purpose. Why is the paragraph written? What is the purpose of this paragraph? You can find its main idea, and it might help you figure out the purpose. Here, we talk a lot about the situation at hand. We talk about the problem that we have. So the purpose is to describe a situation or a problem. We won't find a lot of these crazy species in the supermarket, and the author tries to explain why. So, did you figure it out? Why are most farmers growing only certain kinds of crops? Most farmers out there grow only a couple of different kinds of crops, like one kind of corn, one kind of wheat, two kinds of rice, and that's it, even though there are hundreds of different species. Why do they do it? They do it because we need to produce food in large numbers. All farmers have to produce a lot of food so they can feed the 7.4 billion people that live on the planet today. They have to do this, so they're forced to only use those crops which can grow very well and which do not have a high chance of dying out. That's why we use strong crops like corn and rice because we're sure that they're always going to keep growing. This, of course, makes other species of food crops less interesting and less desirable by the market. And then we get to lose all of these foods. For example, there is an example from the Philippines and China in this text. What is the purpose of this paragraph? Is it to summarize some key ideas from before? Or is it to report data as supporting evidence? I think we can figure out together that the answer is B. The purpose of this paragraph is to report data as supporting evidence. What is data? Data is anything that we know. Data could be anything that we know, anything that we learned from the world. But when we use this data, when we put this data into practice, then it becomes information. Now, this data in the text over here, that there were once thousands of varieties of rice. This is data. This is something that we learned. Now, fewer than 100 are grown there. Another piece of data that we have in the story. In China, 90% of the wheat varieties grown just a century ago have disappeared. Another piece of data. When does all of this data become information? If we use it as evidence for some kind of a problem, as evidence to support a situation or a problem, then this data becomes information. Use the data to get information. Information. That's what data is for. We can know hundreds of different chess moves, for example, and chess strategies, but they're all data unless we go and we actually play chess. Then this data becomes information that we can use to beat the player. That's when information becomes useful to us, and it's not just basic data. Now find the data from the story. What kinds of crops in the Philippines and China are in serious danger of extinction? In Philippines, it's rice, and in China, it's the wheat varieties that are in serious danger of extinction. These are only some crops that have this problem. Lots of different crops were also affected. If you're not sure about a word from the story, you always have the definitions for the new words down below. If you just learned this word variety, then it's a good thing for you to write a sentence that uses this word for something. For example, the sentence from the story says there were once thousands of varieties of rice. You try to use this sentence, this word, in your own sentence, and you're guaranteed to remember it for good. So you can do this right now, and then you can continue with the story. Our next paragraph is titled Saving the Seeds. What is the purpose of this paragraph? Is it to offer another side of an issue, or perhaps to offer a kind of a solution? Saving the seeds. We hear it from the title right away. This paragraph provides a solution to our problem. What is that solution? And can you find the name of the first guy who figured it out? Scan the text quickly for any names and then say that name out loud. It's a mouthful because you haven't seen a lot of names like this one. It's Nikolai Vavilov. Nikolai Vavilov was a Russian scientist who decided, maybe it's a good idea to store seeds, to keep seeds in one place. Other than just collecting seeds in one place, Mr. Vavilov did something else. He suggested the idea to other scientists. When we suggest something, we mention an idea. We tell someone something that is on our mind, a possible solution to a problem, a possible plan or action for doing something. That is a suggestion. For example, if your friend is trying to do their homework but they just can't figure it out, you might give them a suggestion. Hey, you can do this. And your friend doesn't have to listen to you, but they might, because you just gave them a suggestion to do something better. The idea that Mr. Vavilov suggested is that we should collect all of these seeds in a safe place. If we don't, we lose a lot for the future. We lose a lot of different food crops that we will never be able to try. Let's move on to the next paragraph. Let's find its purpose, and then we can move on to analyzing it further. What is the purpose of this paragraph? Let's read about it to figure it out. Here we read about Mrs. Diane Ott Wheely, who wanted to preserve historic plant varieties like the seeds her great-grandfather brought to the U.S. So here we can read an example about one woman and her great-grandfather and what she started because of her great-grandfather. This is another example to support the solution and the issue that we're talking about. So we can say that the purpose of this paragraph is to provide an additional example to support the main idea. What is the example? Why and what kind of farm did Mrs. Wheely start with her husband? Why did she start Heritage Farm? What is it? Try to find the answers and then say them out loud. Now let's practice some speaking. You guys need to tell me what is Heritage Farm and why did Mrs. Wheely start it with her husband? If you guys need more time to answer my question, then you can pause the video and you can take your time and then continue later on. Let's move on to the next paragraph. More importantly, the people at Heritage Farm don't just store the seeds, they plant them. If you answered my question, then you know that Heritage Farm is a kind of seed bank. A seed bank, let's write it down, is a place that holds lots of different seeds. These seeds are stored in very, very well-kept places so that they don't become bad and that we can use them later on. Now, what is this passage mainly about? Now we're looking for the main idea and not the purpose. We're going to get to the purpose in just a second. What is the passage mainly about? It's about the need to preserve different food species. If you remember from the beginning of this lesson, preserving means taking care of something for future use. How do we come to use all of these different food crops that are in seed banks today? We have corn, we have rice. Why would we want to use these? One day, there might be a kind of disease that affects today's crops. Did you think about this one? One day, there might be a disease that hurts corn so bad that we cannot grow it anymore. There might be a disease that hurts rice so that we can't eat it anymore. If this happens, we will want to have other kinds of rice available for us to use and to start growing massively. In case this rice gets a disease, we have another one ready. We have another kind of crop ready for use. This is one way that seed banks can be useful in the future. They're not just museums of old plants, they're also storage places that are going to allow future generations to try all these sorts of plants that are extinct today. Good work so far. If you're not familiar with the words in the text, you have the definitions down below. If this is your first time seeing a word, then try to make a sentence with it. That ice cream has a very strange flavor. It has a funny taste. That's one way to use the word flavor. You can find your own way by writing a sentence. Say it out loud, write it in your notebook, just make it. All right, now let's find the purpose of this final paragraph. What is the purpose? I think that the purpose of this paragraph cannot be to report data as figures or statistics. Do we see any figures or statistics? A figure is another word for a big number. A figure is like a number. Do we see any figures here? Not really. What about statistics? Statistics are, for example, 1 in a million people likes pistachio ice cream, for example. I'm not sure. So statistics tell us things about a large number of things. No statistics, no numbers, so the purpose must be to present a concluding idea. A concluding idea is like a finishing idea, a finishing sentence to put everything together and to finish the story. That's the point of the last paragraph in this story. It's to tell us about the problem once more and to remind us of the solutions once more. Now we are ready to do a recap of the whole story. We need to write what happened in each of the different parts. You can do this from memory, but if you already forgot some facts about famine, you can always go back in the video to find them. What do you remember about the Great Famine of 1845? Where was it and what caused it? Can you provide your answers out loud, or at least write them down in your notebooks? Write some key details from this story so you can remember all of this data and all of this information and not just the new English words. This way, you're learning new things as well as English. So, in 1845, it was the country of Ireland that suffered a great famine. It happened because everyone just ate only one kind of potato. And when the potato got sick, when it got struck with disease, everyone got very hungry. That's a famine. Now, feeding 7 billion people is not an easy job. So farmers are forced to do something that causes problems for food species. What is something that farmers do to feed 7 billion people? They grow only certain kinds of foods. That's what they do. And then we get to lose all of these other kinds of crops because they're not needed and they cannot be grown in large quantities on a wide scale. So, about these food varieties that are lost, we've read some data, some statistics that tell us that we're losing a very big number of these crops. It's not just a couple each year. We know that there were thousands of different varieties of rice in the Philippines, but now there are less than 100. What other crops do you think have become extinct? Have you heard of any plant that is not alive today? Maybe you saw it in a movie about dinosaurs, or in a cartoon about the past, but you cannot see it today. Try to figure out if you can remember any kind of plant that has become extinct. All right, and lastly, we talked about the solution. How can we save the seeds? We can put all of them in a seed bank to make them safe and secure. That's one way we can keep these food crops alive. What's the name of that seed bank started by Mrs. Ott Wheely? It's called the Heritage Farm, a place where they not only store the seeds, but they also grow all of these new varieties and they let people try all of these different food crops that have become extinct. Such a great way to visit the past, much like seeing an extinct animal. I would love to go to a seed bank one day. What about you guys? After you figure it out, you can find yourself a partner, a classmate, a friend that you can talk to about the following problem. Don't forget to use English. Do you think saving the world's varieties of foods is as important as saving animal species from extinction? Why or why not? Keep in mind that we say as important as animal species. Nobody says that food species are more important. The question is, are they equal or are animal species more important? Support your idea with another argument. Try to explain to your friend why you think that way. Why are animal species more important, or why are plant species just as important? You can take 2 or 3 minutes to discuss about this problem, and then we can move on. Pause the video now, and then continue when you're ready to move on with the lesson. Now, to finish this lesson, we're going to learn about storing seeds. This is an extra part of the story for you guys to learn more words and to practice some more English. We have 3 different tips for storing seeds. The first tip talks about the conditions over there being cool. The second one talks about the seeds staying dry. And the third one talks about protecting the seeds. You can take a minute to read these on this page, and then we will move on to the questions. While you're reading, keep in mind that there might be some unfamiliar words in the story, like consistent in the tip 1. Consistent means that it stays the same over a long period of time. If you have an apartment where it gets cold and hot and cold and hot and cold and hot, the temperature is not consistent. If the temperature is always hot, 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 then it is consistent, which means it stays the same for a long period of time. And the word in tip 2 that you might not be familiar with is the word shatter, a verb which means to break something into a lot of different pieces. Now, I hope you read the 2 tips so you can read the third one as well. It's about protecting the seeds. Now, what do pests do to all of our seeds? They nibble through them. Nibbling through something, for example, this cable here is biting it just a little bit, something that pests love to do on about everything they can get their hands on. Rabbits love to nibble on tiny seedlings, for example. Critters, rodents, and bugs enjoy nibbling on seeds in seed banks. That's why we should be careful to keep them safe. Now you guys need to answer these 5 questions down below, and you should find the answers in the 3 tips. What places can you store seeds? We should store seeds in cool, dry places, in glass jars, metal containers, wire mesh, and you need to answer the rest of these by yourself from these tips in the story. You can take your time, pause the video until you find the right answer. I believe you guys can do it. Here's a fun fact before we go. From the 300 varieties of corn sold 100 years ago, now there are only 12. Some kinds, including this kind of corn, which looks very strange, only exist in seed banks. It's very sad. Well, that's it for today. Thank you very much for listening and for doing all these exercises together with me. Please don't forget the exercises from your book. Today we talked about the importance of saving the different kinds of food crops that are becoming extinct. You guys were excellent. I hope you understood the passage and I hope you looked through the words to find the ones you don't know so you can learn them today. Thank you again, and I will see you very soon for another English class. Goodbye, boys and girls. See you next time.